With something we haven't really talked about too much on the show, we have been getting lots of questions from producers about carbon credits, carbon markets, and how with that, farmers can add some extra dollars to their operation. Iowa State University economist Chad Hart says the idea of carbon markets or paying farmers for their conservation practices that keep carbon in the soil appears to be more economically sustainable now than in years past. He joined me to break down how carbon markets and ag work and discuss any financial implications.
Well, I have to go back to what is a carbon credit with this one. So if you think about it, what we're trying to do is we're trying to set up a carbon market. And by carbon here, we're looking at carbon as it moves through the atmosphere. So I want you to think about everything that we do either captures carbon or releases carbon. And in the case of agriculture, we do a lot of both. The idea is as we grow crops, our crops basically pull in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, so bringing that carbon from the air into the plant and into the soil. At the same time, too, when we harvest those crops and utilize those crops, we release some of that carbon back up into the atmosphere. With a carbon market, what we're trying to do is we're trying to create financial incentives, if you will, to utilize less carbon or figure out ways to keep more carbon either in the soils or in the water or in some sort of steady state form so that it's not adding to the carbon in the atmosphere. Because the carbon adding in the atmosphere creates what they call the greenhouse gas effect. That leads to things like the heat domes we've been experiencing over the past year and a half. And so that's the idea. Is a carbon market is, like I say, trying to create financial incentives for agricultural producers to capture more carbon or release less carbon.
And from what I understand, this is something that farmers and landowners are getting contacted about more and more frequently by various companies, right?
They definitely are, because what you're seeing now is, I'm going to argue, a broad-based effort here. There are a lot of companies, not just within agriculture, but especially outside of agriculture, that are worried about carbon. We're worried about how it's changing the global atmosphere. And agriculture is seen as one of the, let's call it, most direct industries that you can work with to create a carbon market. Because as farmers, the idea is our farmers and ranchers have ways that they can basically modify their production practices to bring carbon either out of the atmosphere and put it into the soil, or they can use those practices to release less carbon. So if you think about, like, for our crop producers out there, moving from conventional tillage to reduced tillage or no tillage actually is a carbon saving move. You could look at putting some land that, maybe marginal cropland into more permanent grasslands, and that saves carbon. For our livestock ranchers out there, they could look at rotational grazing, which actually saves carbon. So these are all techniques farmers can utilize to save carbon, create what we call those carbon credits, which could be traded to other companies.
And I know that this isn't the first time that carbon has been talked about with farmers. What would make it different this time around?
The biggest thing that makes it different from, say, 10, 12 years ago, I would argue, is the outside agricultural interest and the amount of money that's being put towards it. You have your big companies like Apple and Google, McDonald's, Walmart, all talking about the sustainability of their business practices. And they're looking for ways to establish how they're saving carbon. In fact, one of my favorite little notes on this is if you ever go out and just go to the Google website, look down at the bottom of the page, and you notice they have a statement there that I believe says carbon neutral since 2007. So you're seeing all sorts of companies that are interested in being able to promote or talk to consumers about how they've reduced their carbon footprint. And they're putting money where that, if you will, outreach is. They're willing to spend money to find industries that can help them create that carbon reducing environment. And ag, like I say, has definitely been a target because of the ability of agricultural practices to save carbon.
Do you have any dollar figures, dollar amounts, as to how a farmer might be impacted financially if they were to introduce carbon sequestration to their operation?
At this point, it's hard to put a dollar value to it because it goes back to this trading of these carbon permits and what their value could be. When we look at what's being proposed right now, and what you've got is, I'm not going to call it a true carbon market yet, but what you've got are a lot of transactions that individual companies are trying to make with farmers on these carbon credits. Most of that has solidified to around $15 to $20 per what they call carbon credit. And a carbon credit is supposed to represent the reduction of carbon loss of 1 ton of basically carbon dioxide. For most farmers that we talk about in the Midwest, when looking at the practices we could do, like moving from conservation to no-till, you're talking about that move probably saves 0.6 tons per acre. So you may be talking about a payment of $10 to $15 per acre to our farmers right now based upon what we're seeing in the market. But some of our longer term studies suggest, and what we're seeing within, like I say, these companies that are interested in carbon, is that that's likely a sort of low price to get things started, and that we could see these carbon prices build up over time as we develop the market, as we figure out new techniques in not only creating the carbon credits, but also, build the market structure around trading those credits.
So this is something, I guess, at least right now, that wouldn't be the main component of a farming operation, but something more supplemental in terms of income.
Correct. I have described this as like it's the side gig for agriculture. You can think about those folks that, you have your normal job and then maybe you drive Uber or Lyft on the side, or, we're delivering for Eat Street or DoorDash. It's a way to create some side income in relation to your main job. And in this case, for our agricultural producers out there, no, our main job is still producing the crops and livestock that we do. And hey, if we can generate these carbon credits additionally to that, that adds a little bit of revenue on the side for the farm.
Any final things to consider or projections on where you think we might see this a year, 5 years from now?
Well, like I said, I think when you're looking here, we're just at the very beginnings of trying to create these markets. It's going to be a bumpy road. It's going to take some time for these things to develop. When you look at existing markets in carbon right now, probably the longest running one is one that the European Union has. And it's taken them roughly a decade to sort of get a structure fully around that to where you could say that market is behaving like a true market. So I think it's going to take us some time to build here. Until then, I tell farmers, the best thing I can tell you to do is do your research here. This is going to, require folks to do some homework. This is not like trading corn or soybeans or cattle and hogs, where you do have these standardized markets. Here, it's more of an individual negotiation. And so you've got to figure out who's the company you're working with, what practices are they willing to pay for, how much are they willing to pay. It requires a lot more homework on the part of the farmer to participate in carbon markets right now.
Might be one of those things, a good idea to speak with, I guess, an attorney in a case like this, or?
Yep. It's definitely something I think you want to talk to not only an attorney, but talk to your family, talk to trusted advisors. For some folks, I can think of it as we've had these movements of like wind turbines throughout the upper Midwest. We're seeing some movement on solar panels. We've seen some trading in, for example, in mineral rights on the farm. I want you to think of carbon right now sort of in that space, where, you want to sit down and talk with your trusted advisors, because if you get in these markets right now, you are signing a contract. It is legally binding. And in order to create these carbon credits, what you're basically doing is you're agreeing to change some of the practices on your farm. So you're giving up a little bit of control in order to capture a little bit of payment. And you want to make sure you understand exactly what that contract says.